anyone suspected of sympathy for it or for the freedom and independence of Belarus. We will also talk about political prisoners. We are extremely grateful that President Trump's success in negotiating for the release of almost 200 prisoners, including Sergei, who will testify momentarily, and others, 200 or so, and hopefully there will be more. We will hear frank and shocking reports about prison conditions and the entire political prisoner system run by the Belarusian government. It's been often called the revolving door of repression by which prisoners are taken in order to intimidate others and treat them as transactional hostages to be released as new victims are being arrested. And we'll also talk about what the U.S. government can do on many fronts to build on the Trump administration's impressive results in restarting diplomacy with Belarus and securing life-saving prisoner releases. Congress needs to strongly support the president's effort to get the remaining prisoners released and at the same time to take apart the revolving door of repression. We are truly honored to have today Sergei Tinakovsky with us. In 2020, Sergei was the principal leader of the Belarusian opposition and its candidate for president of Belarus. He was then arrested and imprisoned before the election. His wife, Svetlana, was then selected to be the candidate. A tremendous popular movement for democracy had been building around Sergei, and it flowed into Svetlana's heroic candidacy. We know what happened. The dictator, Lukashenko, was in deep trouble, faked the election results, massive protests ensued, and the dictator responded with a terrible crackdown. Many thousands were imprisoned, hundreds of thousands were driven into exile. In June of last year, however, Sergei was released from prison as a direct result of the diplomacy of President Trump. And I read your op-ed in the Washington Post, and you did say, if not for Donald Trump's unorthodox diplomacy, I would not be writing these words today. You went on to say that Trump's instincts for direct engagement, calibrated pressure, and transactional diplomacy are what the moment requires. So thank you, Sergei, for testifying, all of our distinguished witnesses today. You have all made sacrifices for your country. We deeply honor your patriotism, your courage, your tenacity, and that of Svetlana and all the other prisoners of conscience. And today, perhaps we could hear some details about what your imprisonment was all about. Details helps to drive us to do more to try to mitigate this misery. And I do want to thank you and all of you for bearing witness to a terrible truth. Prisoner releases haven't brought Belarus closer to freedom or democratic government, or even independence and sovereignty. As we all know, Belarus has been a dictatorship for 30 years, has gotten much worse since the crackdown began in 2020. The space of independence, of private lives and personal opinions has gotten much tighter. The range of acts that are liable to bring punishment have become all-encompassing, and the country becomes more and more visibly subjugated to Russia. The people of Belarus don't want to see their country subjugated to Russia, and they certainly don't want to participate in Russia's war on Ukraine and its egregious war crimes, including the trafficking of innocent Ukrainian children. As prime author of 4 United States laws that address Belarus over the years, I have introduced another bill in Congress that would promote democracy and human rights in Belarus. The Belarus Democracy, Human Rights, and Sovereignty Act of 2025, H.R. 3225, updates and strengthens the earlier laws, and it's pending before the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. The 4 earlier acts included the landmark Belarus Democracy Act of 2004, and I would note parenthetically that that bill became the template for the Magnitsky Act, Global Magnitsky, and it had 2 primary parts to it, and we heard from the Belarusians so robustly as we were writing it as to what would work, and one was to hold individuals to account so they could not do business here, and secondly, to deny visas. And that, that got a lot of people out of prison, we believe, and certainly George W. Bush was very faithful. He had a list of approximately 200 top Lukashenko cronies who were on that list, and to our great happiness, the European Union did follow suit and had their own list. So it was one of those things where we're all on the same page vis-a-vis Lukashenko. We reauthorized in 2011, and then in 2020 we added it as a bill to a larger bill that was making its way through the House. The current bill would update and strengthen all of those earlier laws, reauthorize the Belarus Democracy Act of 2004, and it would expand the list of Belarusian authorities who may be subject to U.S. sanctions beyond the country's senior leadership and security services to include those directly responsible for abducting Ukrainian children, cooperating with Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, and Russia's militarization of Belarusian territory. So we expanded it in a way that we think will be helpful to helping the innocent escape the tyranny of a dictatorship. It also refuses to recognize Lukashenko as a legitimately elected leader of Belarus. It should be obvious, but we need to say it. We need to say it with a clear declarative sentence. We continue to call for the immediate release of all political prisoners. We refuse to recognize any incorporation of Russia into a so-called union state, and that the last time we did it, that was a focus as well, when Putin was making grand overtures about taking over Belarus, and he was doing some very nefarious things to try to accomplish that. We also authorize U.S. assistance to promote democracy, human rights and the rule of law, and of course sovereignty in Belarus. So I just want to say to all of you, what you say today will be heard by many. We will get this out to our colleagues very, very assertively and aggressively. Belarus, very often, the tyranny of the urgent. We got all the problems going on in Iran. We got all the other problems going on around the world. Of course, Putin's war of aggression. But the Belarusians have suffered so much, and we need to speak out and do it boldly. And that's what this hearing is trying to continue, the work that's already started under the Bush administration. Let me introduce our very distinguished witnesses. Sergei Tikhanovsky, who's the activist, as I mentioned before. He was awarded the Sakharov Prize laureate in the 2025 Magnitsky Human Rights Award. We'll then hear from Janusz Kokinski, and I'm sorry if I'm trying hard with those names. He's the head of the International Affairs Department of Diplomatic Advisor to the President-elect, Svetlana. He is, like I said, that's what we have here. Then, without objection, your full vitae will be made a part of the record. These are just very small notes. Then we'll hear from Vitas Jakosmas, who is the project director at Freedom House and leads its Vilnius office. And certainly Lithuania has been very accommodating in receiving so many people as they made their way across the border. We thank what they have done there, but thank you for your leadership as well. He's an expert on Belarus. The Eastern Partnership, Russia, and Lithuanian foreign policy is what he majors in, obviously. Then we'll hear from Jasmine Cameroon, international human rights lawyer and visiting scholar at American University, Washington College of Law. With over 15 years of experience advancing rule of law and legal profession independence across Europe and Eurasia, particularly in Belarus, Russia, and Central Asia. From 2019 to 25, she served as Senior International Legal Advisor at the American Bar Association Center for Human Rights. I'd like to yield to my distinguished colleague, Jim McGovern, for any opening comments.
Well, thank you very much, and I apologize for being a little bit late here. But good afternoon, and I join Co-Chair Smith in welcoming you to this hearing on human rights and political prisoners in Belarus. At our last hearing on Belarus in 2021, the lead witness was Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and she spoke on behalf of the democratic opposition forced into exile following the crackdown by Alexander Lukashenko, who rigged the election to remain in power. At that moment, her husband, Sergei Tikhanovsky, was in jail, put there because the dictator feared the democratic will of the Belarusian people. Today, Sergei sits where Svetlana sat, a free man. Welcome, Sergei. We are grateful that you are here. We look forward to hearing about the aspirations of the Belarusian people. Our message today is that every political prisoner release matters. Sergei was among those released following diplomatic intervention from the Trump administration. Also released were Ales Bialyatsky, a founder of the Vyazna Human Rights Center and winner of the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize, and musician and politician Maria Kayasnikava. Both are part of the Commission's Defending Freedoms Project, with Representative Steve Cohen as their advocate. We also welcome the release of Alexander Yarashuk and Henos Fiadinich, two prominent labor leaders in Belarus. These successes were negotiated with concessions. There is a time and place to debate trade-offs, but today our focus is on the individuals, and we welcome those who have gained their freedom and seek wisdom from our witnesses on how to free more. We cannot forget those who are still in prison. Vyazna lists 1,152 persons as current political prisoners inside of Belarus, but the government arrests people almost as fast as it releases others. It's like Lukashenko is running a political prisoner reserve to get more concessions. We know that many of those released have their passports or identity documents confiscated or canceled, meaning they cannot legally work or travel. This is deportation and forced statelessness. It makes them easier targets for transnational repression. These are added human rights violations beyond those already suffered in detention. We cannot forget that the freeing of political prisoners does not mean an end to conditions of brutal repression experienced by the people of Belarus, as the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Belarus recently warned. Since the 2020 crackdown, the government tightened restrictions on civil society and human rights defenders. 50,000 arrests or detentions, 8,000 convictions, 4,380 political prisoners, a quarter of which remain in detention. As anti-democratic actors often do, Belarusian authorities use terrorist and extremist labels to vilify groups that they don't like, such as the Belarusian Association of Human Rights Lawyers. And I look forward to hearing from one of today's witnesses on the threats to lawyers and other human rights defenders. Since 2020, the government has shut down nearly 2,000 NGOs, and Belarus is among the countries that uses anti-foreign NGO regulations to diminish civil society and undermine democracy, a topic that this commission explored at its hearing in September. Reporters Without Borders calls Belarus, quote, Europe's most dangerous country for journalists until Russia's invasion of Ukraine, end quote. The Committee to Protect Journalists ranks Belarus as the 5th biggest jailer of journalists in 2025. And we are pleased that among those released last year are Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty journalists, Andrei Kuznechik, and Ihar Losek, the latter of whom Co-Chair Smith and I wrote a letter for following his arrest. The U.S. government should continue to advocate for the release of journalists as a matter of fundamental press freedoms. And to be effective, our voices must carry moral authority. I worry that we forfeit credibility when our own government is cracking down on journalists, like the recent arrest of Don Lemon and Georgia Fort in Minnesota. I welcome the Trump administration's success in freeing political prisoners in Belarus. I encourage them to pursue efforts in other countries. I hope that Vice President Vance will use the occasion of his visit to Azerbaijan later this month to secure the freedom of Gubad Ibadoglu, with whom Co-Chair Smith has adopted in the Defending Freedoms Project. Any strategy to free prisoners of conscience is best done through a human rights framework that both recognizes and asserts that the people of Belarus or any other country have a right to live in freedom and dignity with their human rights respected as provided by international universal human rights law. I look forward to your testimony. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Sergey, the floor is yours.
Check. Chairman, members of the Commission, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Sergei Tikhanovsky. I'm a former political prisoner of Belarus. I spent nearly 5 years in prison and was released only 6 months ago because of American diplomacy. Without it, I would most likely not be alive today. I understand the tradition of hearings like this. I know I'm expected to begin by describing what I endured in prison, by speaking about suffering, conditions, pain. I will be honest, I do not like to dwell on these experiences. But I respect this forum and I will follow its rules. So I will describe my experience with precision, not emotion. I spent almost 5 years in Belarusian prisons in solitary confinement. Approximately 2.5 years were under an incommunicado regime. At times, my cell was less than 6 square meters, including a hole in the floor instead of a toilet. There was no meaningful contact with the outside world. No conversation, no news, even no books. Time lost, all structure. Daily life was reduced to routine, cleaning the cell, standing for hours in the cold, trying to sleep, trying not to fall ill. Medical care was almost non-existent. There were no proper examinations or treatment, only basic pills, if you were fortunate. Meetings with doctors, lawyers, or clergy were routinely denied. Punishment cells were a regular part of this system. They were cold, damp, without a mattress or blanket. The cold causes constant muscle spasms and illness, complete isolation. I consider myself lucky as I spent only 6 months in such a cell. One of my neighbors spent 4 years in those conditions, and he is there right now as we speak. This is what prison looks like in Belarus. I lived through it. But this is not the most important thing I want to tell you. The most important point is that my story is not unique, and that focusing only on stories like mine risks missing the greater danger. More than 1,000 political prisoners remain in Belarusian prisons. Among them are people whom Lukashenko will deliberately hide from you, people he does not intend to release under any circumstances. Their sentences are so long that they were never meant to be served to completion. These are former judges, investigators, security officers, lawyers, and government officials. People he considers traitors. People who took the greatest risks. They are subjected to the harshest conditions and the most brutal torture. I want to name one of them, Vladimir Kniga, a former Special Forces officer, a man of honor. He spent nearly 5 years in punishment cells. He must be rescued as soon as possible, if he is still alive. The sentences these people receive range from 15 years to life, not for committing crimes, but for refusing to commit them, for helping peaceful protesters, for refusing to ignore abuse and torture, for acting according to human conscience. There are many like him, and if no one insists on remembering them, they will be left behind, and in addition to their lives being ruined right now, serving those outrageous sentences. They may not survive. That is why I want to be absolutely clear. Our task must be secure the release of anyone, not only those Lukashenko is willing to hand over. There are only 3 realistic ways to free the remaining hostages. A foreign military intervention, taking hostages from the regime abroad to force an exchange, or coercive diplomacy led by President Donald Trump. As a realist, I strongly support the latter option. Lukashenko needs President Trump far more than President Trump needs Lukashenko. That asymmetry creates enormous leverage for the United States and for Special Envoy Mr. Cole. We have already seen this leverage in action. Lukashenko was among the first to join the newly formed Board of Peace. Watching Belarusian state propaganda struggle to explain this move was surreal. A dictator who has falsified every election since 1996, suddenly presenting himself as a global peacemaker. Lukashenko is a highly sensitive political creature. He understands where power resides today. He understands that the American doctrine of peace through strength leaves little room for criminal regimes like the one enduring in Belarus. His conversations with his friend Maduro remain fresh in his memory as an ominous sign. Lukashenko believes he has something to sell, and it is not only hostages. According to our information, he is actively trying to attract US business interests, national airlines, potash mining, data centers powered by the Belarusian nuclear plant. He believes the current US administration is transactional, and he is betting on that perception. He also seeks to position himself as an intermediary to the Kremlin, or even as an informal channel to other authoritarian regimes. All of this gives the United States tremendous leverage, if it is used wisely. I will not presume to advise President Trump on how to conduct coercive diplomacy. We should all be learning from him. But we also respectfully appeal to the Trump administration and the American people that the people of Belarus, particularly those that are being held in prison for no other reason than seeking freedom and free election, are not forgotten. But I can say this: Mr. Cole has the cards. If there is political will in Washington, not only can all remaining hostages be freed, you may even be able to insist on ending political repression altogether. I do have additional recommendations, but they are better discussed privately, not in a public hearing. I ask you one thing: please do not stop. You have already saved doctors, politicians, bloggers, and even Nobel Prize laureate. But more than 1,000 people remain behind bars. Diplomacy saves lives. I am living proof of that. Thank you.
Sergey, thank you so very much for your very eloquent remarks, but above all for your courage. I mean, all those years in prison, in solitary confinement, and you know, the people left behind have no better advocate than you. So thank you for bearing witness to this ugly truth and trying to get all of us to do more, which we have to do. Thank you so very much. Mr. Kukinchi.
Thank you. Co-Chair Smith, Co-Chair McGovern, thank you for convening this hearing and for your steadfast leadership on Belarus. We are fortunate that support for freedom in my country has remained a bipartisan course in the United States. I appear before you today as Denis Kuczynski, diplomatic advisor to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the democratically elected leader of Belarus. Today, Belarus remains a country where truth is punished, compassion is criminalized, and freedom is treated as extremism. Political prisoners are tortured by cold, isolation, and silence. Families are blackmailed, lawyers are stripped of their licenses for defending the innocent, journalists imprisoned for reporting facts, and even clergy are arrested for public prayers. Workers, teachers, doctors, students are forced to choose between obedience and exile. And yet, Belarus is not only a domestic tragedy. The Lukashenko regime has become something even more dangerous, a weapon in Putin's hands. It is a platform for Russia's war against Ukraine, a hub for sanction evasion, and a launching pad for hybrid attacks against our neighbors. We have seen giant balloons carrying contraband cigarettes across the Lithuanian and Polish borders, orchestrated migration crises, and drones flying into the territory of NATO allies. Since 2020, more than 65,000 people have been subjected to politically motivated detentions. As of today, at least 1,100 49 political prisoners remain behind bars. And conditions for political prisoners are worsening, not improving. Many have recently been placed in shiza, punishment isolation cells with no heating. And during the current temperatures in Belarus, which reached up to minus 30 Celsius, it is a real torture. And this is not abstract. This is also personal. One of those targets, and recent targets, is Artyom, the son of Anatoly Lebedko, an advisor to President Tikhanovskaya and someone well known to the co-chair, Chris Smith. Artyom is not just a case. He's a young man, a son, and also a father of a 7-year-old Polina. And also a life being broken by simply the fact his family stood for democracy. Some prisoners are held incommunicado for months and years, like Andrei Novitsky, Nikolai Banko, Alexander Franskevich, and Nikolai Statkevich. I must also speak separately about women political prisoners, because their situation is an emergency within an emergency. Recently released editor of media outlet Tutbay, Marina Zolotova, shared with me the cases of the most vulnerable women who remain behind bars. And her message was urgent and clear. We must focus attention on those imprisoned the longest, those with serious illnesses, and elderly women. One of such cases is Irina Melcher, a 70-year-old woman with severe health issues. And also my university mate, human rights defender Marfa Rabkova, who has been sentenced to 15 years in prison. Over the past 18 months, negotiations with direct US administration engagement resulted in the release of more than 300 political prisoners. This is significant humanitarian and diplomatic achievement by President Trump. On behalf of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, we deeply appreciate the administration's successful work on this humanitarian track. In particular, Special Presidential Envoy John Cole, who has done an extraordinary and very difficult job to save our countrymen's lives. Our partners at the White House and State Department, like Deputy National Security Advisor Andy Baker, Senior Director Charles McLaughlin, the Vice President Senior Advisor Spiro Ballas, and Deputy Assistant Secretary Chris Smith. And Mr. Chairman, if you allow, it truly brings a small smile, even in such dark circumstances, to see that the same name carried by the same unwavering commitment to freedom. Belarus is fortunate to have not one, but two Chris Smith, two champions named Chris Smith, yourself in Congress and Des Smith in the State Department. I also want to thank the Belarus Affairs Unit, which works through the US Embassy in Vilnius, and among other things, helps to coordinate all the logistics of the releases. I must state that I personally participated in all 5 releases group last year, and I saw what freedom looks like after torture. And yet, new arrests continue every week. Lukashenko releases some hostages and then takes the new ones. And we must continue to work together to stop it. Dear members of Congress, humanitarian work does not end when prison gates open. We need to keep helping our heroes to restore their lives after their release. That is why we need sustained support for trusted partners like Freedom House and the National Endowment for Democracy assistance programs, which actually play a crucial role in supporting victims of repression, and also other partners such as IRI and NDI that help sustain our civil society. We also express deep gratitude to Poland and Lithuania for hosting released prisoners and providing them with a new life. Dear members of the Commission, allow me also to share some recommendations that administration and Congress can take. First, continue and intensify efforts to secure the release of all prisoners and prevent Lukashenko from taking the new hostages, and also stop of the transnational repressions, as Co-Chair McGovern already mentioned. Second, expand emergency humanitarian assistance, medical care, rehabilitation, and relocation. Third, sustain strong support to Belarusian democratic institutions like Office of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, United Transitional Cabinet, and Coordination Council. Fourth, maintain pressure through sanctions and leverage with clear guardrails. Any relief must be tied to a real, verifiable improvements in Belarus. Fifth, we strongly welcome the previously mentioned Belarus Democracy, Human Rights, and Sovereignty Act of 2025, introduced by Co-Chairman Smith, and this legislation is a critical step towards reauthorizing and strengthening America's commitment to free Belarus. And finally, it is essential that the United States continue the Belarus-US strategic dialogue with democratic forces. Honorable members of the Commission, Lukashenko essentially wants the world to believe the situation in Belarus is calming down. In reality, repressions has only been intensified. We must continue to act decisively to save lives whenever possible. And the US track does save lives. Meanwhile, the European track, with a strong sanction, remains a crucial safeguard to save the country. This balance must remain coordinated. And when pressure and strength create openings, it must be used both to secure releases and to advance irreversible change. We do believe that a free and sovereign Belarus is within the national interest of the United States. It would mean fewer risks on the NATO eastern flank and less space for authoritarian and anti-American influence. It would also mean one more predictable trade partner and a place for American investments. We look forward to continuing partnership until every political prisoner is free, repression ends, and Belarus returns to democracy. Thank you for standing with Belarusian people. Long live Belarus, and may God bless this United States of America.
Thank you so very much for that excellent statement and for your recommendations and your work. That's every single day, 7 days a week. Thank you. I'd like to now recognize Mr. Jurgotis.
Thank you. Co-Chairman Smith, Co-Chairman McGovern, I appreciate the opportunity to testify before the Commission on behalf of Freedom House. I will focus my remarks on the use of political imprisonment in Belarus, the conditions faced by those released, and the broader implications this regime has for regional stability and US policy objectives. Belarus is one of the most repressive countries in the world. More than 1,000 political prisoners are detained in Belarus jails. Many are there since 2020. Political prisoners are routinely denied medical care, held in prolonged solitary confinement, and denied access to legal counsel or family contact, as witnessed by Sergei. According to the Belarusian human rights organization Vesna, 9 political prisoners have now died in custody. As individuals are released, new political prisoners are detained on a regular basis, creating a revolving door of repression. In 2025, diplomatic efforts, including commendable work from the Trump administration, contributed to the release or pardon of approximately 360 political prisoners. During the same period, Belarusian human rights organizations documented the detention of at least 509 individuals recognized as political prisoners. The Belarusian authorities rely on selective releases to manage external pressure or to extract concessions and sanctions relief. This pattern has been consistent for decades and has not meaningfully changed. Many individuals who are freed from prison are not permitted to remain in Belarus, but are rather forcibly displaced. In many cases, their passports or identity documents are confiscated, limiting their ability to travel legally, work, or reunite with family members. These practices amount to forced deportation and represent an additional rights violation following unlawful detention. The Belarusian regime does not provide any consular services abroad. Thus, enforced deportation effectively gives the released individuals the status of stateless person. These individuals cannot marry, cannot sell their property in Belarus, or make financial transactions. All of them are unable to see their beloved ones in Belarus or visit the graves of their parents who died during their imprisonment. Health and trauma-related needs are common. Among those released are elderly individuals, including people in their 80s. You mentioned, Mr. Co-Chair, the Yarashuk and Fidinic, they are the examples. Some of the released individuals require medical procedures that were unavailable during detention, and many experience lasting psychological effects related to isolation, abuse, and prolonged uncertainty. High-profile diplomatic releases like that of Sergei Tikhanovsky are important and welcome, but are only a portion of the broader population affected by political imprisonment. Each month, an estimated 20 to 30 individuals complete their sentences and are released without international attention. Their release is often conditional and often resembles probation. In combination with curfews, movement restrictions, and other surveillance tactics, released political prisoners are limited in their ability to reintegrate into communities or find employment. More than 300 former Belarusian political prisoners currently reside in Lithuania, with many others in Poland and neighboring countries. Many arrive without personal belongings and financial resources. Some arrive directly from prison. They require housing, food, medical care, legal assistance, and psychosocial support. Civil society organizations and host governments shoulder much of this responsibility despite limited resources, something I see firsthand. When political prisoners are released, the regime often takes them to the border between Belarus and Lithuania, and Freedom House and Belarusian human rights defenders are there to greet these individuals and support them as they adjust to a new life in exile. In our work, we have literally given former prisoners the shirts off of our backs, found them housing, fed them, helped them set up phones, etc., etc. This work takes time and resources, but we are committed to helping every single individual we can. In addition to domestic repression, the authorities facilitate Russia's sanctions evasion and, in doing so, enable Russia's unprovoked and ongoing war against Ukraine. Belarusian territory was used to support the initial stages of the invasion. Freedom House, as you know, has also collected evidence that Belarus, at the behest of the Russian authorities, has taken more than 2,000 Ukrainian children into Belarus and is indoctrinating and militarizing the children. We also see deliberate escalations in the security environment through hybrid provocations, including migration pressure and border destabilization, followed by partial retreats that are then presented as concessions. While international actors are occupied managing manufactured crises and seeking limited concessions from Belarus, Lukashenko continues to wage a massive campaign of domestic repression against his people. In this sense, political prisoners function as bargaining chips for the Belarusian authorities. Detentions are and selective cases are used to extract concessions. As soon as the regime secures its aims, it jails more people. As one group is released, more people are imprisoned. The releases are transactional gestures designed to manage pressure without altering the underlying system. Now I go to the recommendation section. Based on Freedom House experience, I would offer the following recommendations. First, democratic governments should reaffirm and strengthen support for Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the legitimately elected leader of Belarus, ensuring that she and the democratically elected forces are recognized as the true representatives of the Belarusian people. Second, the United States should consistently bring attention to arrest, detention conditions, releases, and post-release treatment. Releases of high-profile prisoners, while they matter, do not absolve the regimes of responsibility for the thousands of others who remain behind bars. U.S. policy should continue to call for the unconditional release of all political prisoners and the dismissal of all politically motivated charges and guarantees that those released are able to remain in the country rather than being forced into exile. Third, U.S. engagement with Belarus should recognize that releases alone do not change the underlying system of repression. Sustained consequences applied consistently and in coordination with partners are the only way to compel meaningful reform inside Belarus, so long as Lukashenko clings to power. Fourth, burden sharing with European allies is essential, particularly with countries directly absorbing the effects of Belarusian repression. U.S. policy should include direct support for civil society organizations providing housing, medical and dental care, legal assistance, and psychological services. Fifth, we must confront Belarus' role in enabling Russia's aggression. This includes the removal of Russian military personnel and nuclear assets from the Belarusian territory and the establishment of automatic consequences such as the reimposition of sanctions should such forces return. Finally, Moscow and Beijing closely watch how the United States responds to regimes like of Lukashenko. When such regimes are able to secure sanctions relief or other concessions without fundamental reforms, we risk signaling that political imprisonment and subsequent releases are as a useful bargaining chip to curry favor with democratic governments. And a conclusion, it is often said that a political prisoner's greatest fear is to be forgotten. Among those who have been released, another concern has emerged, whether what was traded for their freedom made any difference to those still inside Belarus. This does not diminish the importance of securing releases, but as long as the revolving door of imprisonment continues, we are treating the symptoms rather than the cause. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for your testimony and leadership. I'd like to now turn the floor to Ms. Cameron.
Dear Chairman McGovern, dear Chairman Smith, thank you so much for this opportunity to testify today on Belarusian situation of human rights, and also allow me to specifically highlight situation with systematic destruction of the rule of law and independence of the legal profession. My name is Jasmine Cameron. I'm an international human rights lawyer and a visiting scholar at American University, Washington College of Law. I have spent the last 15 years working to support rule of law, legal development and reform, and independence of the legal profession. I was focusing on different countries, including countries like Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, Poland and Hungary, Georgia, Ukraine, Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan. Nowhere did I see such a consistent, intentional, and brazen assault on lawyers. Push closer. Yeah? Okay. Nowhere did I see such a direct and intentional assault on the lawyers and the legal profession like what I saw in Belarus. So today, I wanted to share with my observations and address 3 areas. First, it's a suppression of individual lawyers in Belarus. Second, total capture by the government of Bar Association. And last, policy recommendation towards Belarus. So let's look at the first area, suppression of independent individual lawyers in Belarus. Repression doesn't happen out of nowhere. It is usually reflected by internal political events. For example, after controversial 2020 presidential elections, lawyers became targets of government repression. And it happens mostly for 2 reasons. First is that lawyers are very often identified with their clients by the government. And second is that government wants to remove any legal means from defendants to be able to protect their rights. And so they remove access to legal, effective representation. As a result, at least 141 lawyers were disbarred, 23 lawyers have been detained, and at least 6 lawyers are currently behind the bars on fabricated charges. And those lawyers are Vital Brachinets, Alexander Danilevich, Anastasia Lazarenko, Yulia Yarchilevich, Alexei Borodko, and Sergei Khlistov. So now I wanted to cover the second area. It's government's capture of the Bar Association. In 2021, government adopted amendments to the law that regulates activities of the Bar Association. By doing that, they gave even more powers to the Ministry of Justice, making it as a political tool of control of the legal profession. So for example, now government approves all of the names of the lawyers that are applying for legal license in advance. Government also approves each candidate that runs for the executive positions of the regional bars. And now, for example, lawyers cannot set up their own law firms or practices. The only way for them to practice law is to participate in so-called consultations that are part of regional bars, which is also part of Ministry of Justice. So this constant pressure creates profound chilling effect on the legal community. And it results in lawyers leaving Belarus into exile. Those lawyers who are left in Belarus, they refuse to take sensitive cases out of fear. And also, legal profession shrunk from 2,200 lawyers to 16, almost a quarter. My final area is recommendations. First, I would like to suggest to support Belarusian individual lawyers, but also civil society organizations by increasing funding to these organizations. For example, Rights to Defense, Право на защиту, is an organization that provides information to legal community. Belarusian Association of Human Rights Lawyers, it's a fairly new organization that unites lawyers in exile. Established organizations such as Human Constanta and other organizations. Likewise, we do need to support American organizations and international initiatives. For example, programs like Justice Defenders, where I used to work. Another example is Free Russia Foundation, that seeks accountability for Belarus' role in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Another example is OSCE, that provides public platform to advocate for rule of law, lawyers, human rights defenders. And also a new initiative called Lawyers at Risk Monitor. It's a global database that monitors, documents, and tracks harassments of lawyers. Also, continue with individual case advocacy, publicly calling for the immediate release of all imprisoned lawyers. Continue to use individual sanctions where applicable and possible. And, of course, to support democratic movement led by Svetlana and Sergei Tikhanovsky. In conclusion, members of the Commission, what we are seeing today in Belarus is systematic elimination of the rule of law. And I urge this Commission to ensure that US policy toward Belarus recognizes that the rule of law is the basis of all human rights. Thank you so much for your attention, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you so very much for that very keen insight. I'm wondering how many political dissidents can even get a lawyer. I know when somebody does represent them, they're often then targeted themselves. These are kangaroo court proceedings to begin with that are absolutely illegitimate. They parallel what goes on in China and North Korea, elsewhere. And so you might want to speak to that in a moment or two. I was struck by the refusing to commit crimes phrase, talking about people who then find themselves on the other side of the jail, inside the jail. And I'm wondering how widespread that might be. It would seem to me that they make an extreme example of somebody in the government, particularly in the security apparatus, that refuses to go along with committing crimes, and then next thing you know, they're the target. That doesn't happen in too many places as far as I know. Maybe you could elaborate on that. In terms of the International Committee for the Red Cross, have they had recent access to the prisons, whether it be those in solitary or in a jail setting? And the punishment cells that Sergei, that you described, 6 months is a long time, and yet you said others have been even longer. How long can someone last when they're cold, sick, isolated? Hopefully they know they're not forgotten, but Lukashenko, I'm sure, goes out of his way to make sure evidence is not provided. I remember Václav Havel saying so famously that because of Radio Free Europe and especially the BBC, he knew that there was hope out there, that people knew about what was going on in the infamous gulags. So I just thought, maybe you want to speak to that as well. And do you know of any efforts right now that are being undertaken by the administration to try to release some additional prisoners? Again, knowing that there is this revolving door issue, but still for someone who's a longstanding person and the women especially who have been maltreated, are they being raped? Is that the harassment that they have to undergo at the hands of Lukashenko's thugs? Maybe you could speak to that as well. We will try very hard to get this bill passed. It is bipartisan. I just say to my colleagues, Bill Keating, your colleague, is the principal co-sponsor with me. We've worked together before in Belarus, and he believes very, very strongly in it. So we are trying to get this bill up for a vote. I do think we can get it passed and into law. I would hope that the administration wouldn't see this as a way of, in any way, short-circuiting efforts to get prisoners out. This is designed, because when we got it passed in 2004, when a number of prisoners were released, there were people within the George W. Bush administration who thought, well, you know, it achieved its goals, time to, and I said, no, it's the last thing you want to do. It has to be sustained and predictable pressure on the Lukashenko dictatorship, not anything that looks sporadic and could be on again, off again. So we want to make sure that the administration understands this aids the effort to secure the release of prisoners, no matter what Lukashenko may say, or his negotiators. We got to be serious about this until Belarus is free. Yeah.
I'll take the question about the U.S. engagement. Sergei agreed to talk about the conditions in the solitary confinements, and maybe the colleagues will talk about the human rights as well. I just want to reiterate, I was today and yesterday at the White House with the Vice President and President's advisors, with Charles McLaughlin, Spiro Bellas, and at the State Department. We know that this administration continues to do everything possible to secure the releases of all people, and what we essentially also need is an amnesty. Because what we see, unfortunately, some of the people who were released and are now in Lithuania and Poland, against some of them, they started new criminal cases. So we essentially need to find, the way how to engage, into securing this amnesty as well. So we don't have the revolving door, and we know that administration doing its very best, and it's not an easy work. And we applaud this, this efforts and this attention, while so many crises are in the world, that it's within the President Trump agenda and his great team and special envoy John Cole, who visited Belarus several times and saved lives of many. So we are assured that this track will continue, and we hope that it will be the first step. This first humanitarian track will be the first step actually for democratization of Belarus, essentially. And this is also this political track, something that we continue to work with the U.S. administration on this. And what I mentioned in my remarks about the strategic dialogue and about the work that we do with the administration on the political track is very important. So we hope that we will see more releases this year. And again, as I reiterated in the statement, we hope to be prepared to welcome our heroes from prison, but also it's important, and that's what we reiterated with our colleagues in the State Department and the White House, that people need to stay inside the country. They should have a right to stay inside the country and have this amnesty. And if, in the case, we will see more like 1,000 people out, we need to be ready for this. We need to be prepared. And here, again, we call as well on the U.S. administration and the Congress also to look for opportunity for such support as a humanitarian aid in this regard. Thank you. I'll back.
And the Red Cross has not been in any time recently?
Well, Red Cross in Belarus is a very interesting creature because it's in some ways it's very much is also connected, to the regime
the
and
Swiss.
so on.
Providing logistic service.
Yeah, but yeah. So we again with them it's they've been helping in Vilnius and some other places, but in Belarus it's a very organization very much connected as well to regime. But we've spoken to IFRC and ICRC as well, and we keep asking and keep telling them that they need to demand the access to political prisoners, because this is a big issue as well. We also keep saying this to all the diplomats who are still there, that they should keep as well demanding the access to political prisoners. And also, I know the chairman, the question of religion freedom is very close to you, and we have a big amount of imprisoned clergy in Belarus, including priests, including believers, people who just went for rosary praying, and they were detained and arrested. So we need to keep also working with all the partners to release these people, including with the Holy See as well. So all the efforts as well from you and from congressmen on putting this high on the agenda of the U.S. administration, but also in the Holy See, that would be quite helpful.
Just briefly before I go, and to my distinguished colleague, tomorrow I'm chairing a hearing with Sam Brownback and a number of people who are part of the International Religious Freedom Summit. what you think needs to be focused upon vis-a-vis Belarus, please let me know. I had thoughts of asking questions, but the more specific about which prelates or what bishops, who whatever is behind bars, the better to bring that out in tomorrow's hearing.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yakonis, you said that releases alone do not change the underlying system of repression, and that U.S. engagement with Belarus should recognize this. So how would you rate the U.S. government's overall approach to Belarus in the last year in terms of advocacy on matters beyond the specific prisoner releases? Do administration officials engage with their Belarusian counterparts on human rights principles and frameworks? I mean, do you recommend improvements in this regard?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, it's a complex question. I think that everyone who spoke welcomed the releases and all the efforts. What I am calling for to have a more systemic approach. I think that the administration understands that there's this Belarus currently, we can say, is a country, like a state of terror, right, which is a never-ending cycle. And I think, and I'm pretty sure that it is being communicated to the officials in Minsk. I also know that there are efforts like addressing the issue that Denis mentioned, that people need to have a right to flee or to stay. So I understand that this is not an easy task, but we need to be mindful that, and we have seen this situation before. In 2015, all political prisoners were released, and just after a month, new political prisoners were detained when sanctions were lifted. So we need to have that in mind. Also, we can go even further than that, mentioning that the repressions against the recently released political prisoners are not ending because their relatives, their family members are being targeted.
Right.
I witnessed that firsthand when political prisoners were asking, whom do we call at the U.S. embassy to testify, to put that on the record that my wife has received a call, and there's a continuation of their harassment. So this terror does not end with the release. Also, partly touching upon what Co-Chair Smith raised, human rights defenders are recording and archiving all these torture cases. I can only praise the work of human rights defenders. They are in touch basically with every single political prisoner who is released, making sure that this impunity issue is being addressed. And I think that that's a paramount issue. In addition to what the administration does with the release of the political prisoners, this impunity issue needs to be addressed, and we need to be very clear about that. Maybe that also could be opportunity for synergies with the European counterparts, when someone is playing a role more of a good cop, the other of a bad cop. But I think that there is room for better coordination.
Thank you. Mr. Tianovsky and Mr. Kuczynski, so we've heard about how when prisoners are released, authorities confiscate their identity documents, such as their passports, or they cancel or refuse to renew passports for Belarusians living in other countries. So this has the effect of rendering people stateless, essentially, right? So can you give us the Belarusian exile perspective of this practice? What does it mean for people in real terms and for their families? And how can policymakers address this? And I just want to ask unanimous consent to include in the hearing record a statement from the Committee to Protect Journalists. I'm also pleased to report that CPJ recently joined as a partner in the Defending Freedoms Project, which facilitates congressional advocacy for prisoners of conscience. So we welcome, and I also ask consent to include a statement from the Solidarity Center, which will be forthcoming. But okay, go ahead.
My English is not far not perfect.
Neither is
Dennis,
I'll help you
Yeah.
out.
Прежде всего, Лукашенко относится к политзаключенным как к товару.
So first of all, Lukashenko sees the political prisoners as an item, as a good.
Поэтому он следит, чтобы товар не исчез.
So he looks that the good does not disappear, the item does not disappear.
И после смерти Алексея Навального провели общую проверку всех политзаключенных в тюрьмах.
So after Navalny's death, they've done these searches within the prisons.
Да, и многие действительно находятся в ужасных условиях, но им не дают умереть, как правило.
Many are in terrible conditions, but usually they do that. They make things possible that they don't die. So they put them to this state of not getting dead.
Однако есть случаи, когда политзаключенные умирают в тюрьмах.
But there are cases when political prisoners die in prison.
Да, и насилие имеет место, но чаще в тех случаях, когда имена политзаключенных неизвестны.
So violence takes place in prisons, but more often when the names of these people are not widely known.
Он относится к ним как к дешевому товару.
So Lukashenko thinks that this is like a cheap items, cheap goods.
Да, и такие политзаключенные, как Владимир Книга, о котором я говорил сегодня, они подвергаются насилию и ужасным пыткам.
So people like Mr. Kniga that I mentioned, they actually the ones who suffer the most and have tortures inside prisons.
Потому что бывшие сотрудники силовых ведомств, полиции воспринимаются агрессивно, подвергаются буллингу и насилию со стороны криминальных элементов в тюрьме.
So ex-law enforcement people or ex-former policemen, they actually experience severe pressure from the regular criminals who sit inside jails.
И администрация тюрем никак не защищает их.
And jail administration does not protect or does not help them, does not defend them.
И для них получается единственный способ выжить — это все время находиться вот в этой камере ШИЗО.
And the only way they can actually, this type of prisoners survive, is be in this confinement, punishment confinement.
И поэтому Владимир Книга там все время находится, и такие же, как он.
So that's why Vladimir Kniga and people like him are there for a long time.
Вы спрашивали, как политзаключенные узнают, что про них не забывают.
Also, I want to answer the question is like how political prisoners understand that they're not forgotten when they're in prison.
Иногда приходят какие-то новости от других там заключенных или сотрудников тюрем, или там по средствам массовой информации.
Sometimes we're receiving news from people who are working in prison, or sometimes from media, from state media.
И когда мы узнавали, что проходят мероприятия, когда обсуждаются права человека, нарушения прав человека в Беларуси, когда вводятся какие-то санкции, когда оказывается давление на режим, мы знали, что о нас не забывают и за нас борются.
When there were some events or hearings about human rights situation, human rights abuses, when we knew in prison that new sanctions are imposed and the more pressure is put on the Lukashenko regime, we knew that we are not forgotten.
Но очень сложно находиться вот в этом режиме инкоммуникада и не потерять веру.
But it's very difficult to be in this incommunicado mode and not to lose faith.
Потому что когда ты не получаешь долгое время никакой информации, ты можешь потерять веру, и тогда можешь даже сойти с ума.
When often you don't receive the information, you may lose the faith or actually go crazy.
Действительно, без документов политзаключенным очень трудно реабилитироваться и найти свое место в обычной жизни.
This is true that without documents, it's difficult for ex-political prisoners to find a new way, new life, and legalize and get
И
support.
мы просим американскую администрацию, чтобы при подобных сделках настаивали на том, чтобы документы людям возвращались.
And I do believe and recommend to the U.S. administration to demand during these talks with the Lukashenko regime that the documents should be given back to people.
Политзаключенные в Беларуси не имеют вообще никаких прав.
Political prisoners in Belarus don't have any rights at all.
И поэтому, относясь к ним как к товару, Лукашенко и не считает, что он должен дать им хоть какие-то документы.
The reason why Lukashenko is treating them as items and goods, that's why he doesn't give them any rights.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
If I can add to what Sergei said, as an illustration, what happens to a political prisoner who comes to Lithuania or elsewhere without any documents. So we had the case in September, like 2 political prisoners came without any documents, even from the imprisonment facility. So I received a call with a photo of a name, surname written by hand, and a birthday. Like, can you identify this person, verify that it's the actual person? So we did that pretty fast, but the person who's coming like that, Lithuania, for instance, has an opportunity, has a possibility to issue humanitarian residence permit. We start this process. It takes up to 3 months or so. Then once this humanitarian residence permit is received, a person can apply for a passport of a foreigner, a travel document issued by Lithuania. I know that Poland is able to do that. And this is, again, we can only appreciate these neighbors actually going at length with this kind of situations. But we also know that Belarusian authorities can issue a travel document before the release. We know such cases, so therefore, as Sergei said, that should be a clear demand before their release to not complicate their lives further, because the regime is very, very cynical in this regard. Yes.
I just have one more quick question, if I can, of Ms. Cameron, if I might. You spoke chillingly of how the Belarus government has taken over the Bar Association. And as a result, the bar now actively participates in persecution of lawyers, shrinking the profession, essentially. So what is the practical result of this? Is it harder for individuals and families to find a lawyer when they need help? Or is it that the lawyers they find represent the interests of the government? You recommend legislation to specifically address the persecution of legal professionals in authoritarian regimes. Can you just expand on that briefly?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for the question. It's actually everything.
Yeah.
First, it's really hard for families to replace lawyers, and the government is using different tactics. First, there is a very common tactic of using NDAs, that they require all the lawyers in sensitive cases to sign those agreements. Later on, they're using that NDAs during the bar hearings, disciplinary hearings, as a tool to withdraw the license. For example, in several sensitive cases, we know that there were 5 to 6 lawyers changed because of that. Even in Sergei cases, right, your case, I believe it was 5 or 6 lawyers that were changed, specifically with that purpose, so the defendant will not have adequate legal representation. In other sensitive cases, it happened all the time. In Babarika, Victor Babarika as well. Bar Association being used as a tool of political propaganda and political control. They have their aims. What happens at the Bar Association is that they have closed-door hearings where they review behavior of the attorneys, and very often they come out saying that their behavior did not accord to the local legislation, whatever that means. All of the standards are very vague and not defined. Not only does it go against the international standards for the bar standing, but also in terms of lawyers' rights. Bar Association should be a guardian to protect lawyers and legal profession. In Belarus, it's the opposite, is that the Bar Association is actually a tool in the hands of Minister of Justice to achieve political aims and political agenda.
Which is unfortunate. I'm going to yield to you, and then I'm going to have to leave, but I want to thank Chairman Smith for putting this hearing together, but...
I just wanted to give one case we had a few years ago when a lawyer that was the lawyer of a political prisoner, he became political prisoner himself, and then there was a lawyer who was a lawyer of political prisoner, and he became political prisoner, And then there was a third one who became his lawyer and also became a political prisoner.
Yes.
So it becomes like a carousel or George Orwell
Right, no,
style.
it's-
So
And
this
just a quick comment is that, as I mentioned, that the numbers dropped dramatically from 2,200 to 1,600. For the population of 9.5 million, it's very small number. Just to give you an idea, the ratio is at about one lawyer per 6,000 people, whereas ratio in other countries, for example, Spain has one lawyer serves around 330 people, or in Germany it's around 600
Right.
per lawyer. In Ukraine, 500. And so you can get an idea what a big devastation on legal profession
Yeah.
these policies are.
Well, I want to thank all of you. I have to excuse myself. I thank you for your courage in being here and speaking out. It's incredibly important to all of us, and I yield back to our chair.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Just a few final questions, and I thank you so much for, again, bearing witness to such difficult truths. The UN Universal Periodic Review in November, I read the submission that was made by the Belarusians, and you read that and you think that every human right is being followed, international treaty obligations are being respected. I've never seen such a whitewash in all of my life, and very often dictatorships do go to the Human Rights Commission and they try to mislead. And I'm wondering, how strong has the Human Rights Commission been? I've gone there many times on behalf of countries and causes, and there's always a sense of disappointment because certain rogue nations sit in judgment of other human rights abusers. But in Belarus's case, you read their submission, it's like nothing to see here. So your thoughts on how the UN has responded, including the Commission? They claim that they have signed onto and are soon going to sign onto a number of other obligations, treaties and the like. If you don't live up to what is so basic, what good is that? No one has done that better on the world stage than the People's Republic of China. I remember for years they would make statements that they're going to sign the International Covenant on International Religious Freedom, and they got away with announcing that for years coming into Washington. It's like, well, sign it and ratify it, now enforce it. And of course, it was all one big ruse and one big lie. So if you could speak to that, the faith community, maybe spend a little more time on how they're faring. When they speak out on behalf of a persecuted person, what happens to them? Where is the faith community, the different faith sectors, whether it be Christians or Jews or other faith disciplines? Is Lukashenko using the war, Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine, as a cover? While all eyes are focused on Ukraine, he goes and he does even nastier things than he's ever done before. Is that something that's happening? On the women who are incarcerated, what happens to them? Are they raped? Are they sexually abused? And the list, we've looked at the list that we have, at least, and you have, is available online of prisoners. How many people may be missing from that? Just because it's so hard to ascertain everyone that this dictatorship throws into prison. And that list, I'm sure it's fully shared with the State Department and everybody else. We should make that a part of our record here, just so that we know better what's going on there. And Viasna, is that one of the groups that does a good job in compiling those lists? Because that's what we've looked at. But if you could speak to those issues. I know the Europeans, they're preoccupied, as we all are, with the war of aggression, but we can't look askance towards Belarus as he's crushing people while people seemingly are not looking, and we are looking. That's one of the reasons why we're holding this hearing, to say we want to accelerate our work, not even keep the status quo going. And sanctions do work, and the more we implement it in a predictive way, that we're not kidding. We want these people out. I love the idea of calling for that amnesty, which I think is so important. So it's not just, you're back in now because you're not free from this tyranny. So if you could speak to some of those issues, please.
Отвечая на предыдущий вопрос, хотел бы на своем примере показать, насколько ужасна ситуация с правами человека в Беларуси.
Just very quickly on the previous question, on my personal example, I want to share how the situation with human rights is really bad in Belarus.
Когда меня судили, меня обвинили в организации всех массовых беспорядков в Беларуси во время 2020 года.
When I was sentenced, they put the blame on me that I was responsible for all the, protests and everything happened in Belarus 2020.
Абсолютно всех, в которых участвовали сотни тысяч, а может быть и миллион человек.
All of it that were hundreds of thousands or maybe million people.
Но обвинение не смогло предоставить ни одного свидетеля в суде, кто бы смог это подтвердить.
But they didn't find any witness in the court that would have been able to confirm that.
И адвокатам не позволили вызвать в суд ни одного свидетеля, свидетельствующего обратное.
And they couldn't find any person that would testify the reverse.
То есть политзаключенные не могут себя никак защитить в суде.
So political prisoners are not able to defend themselves at all while they have in these courts, so-called courts.
И поэтому дальше они находятся в режиме инкоммуникада, и адвокаты вообще к ним не могут прийти. Но они же и никак не могут им и помочь.
So the political prisoners remain incommunicado, and the lawyers they're not able to visit or help the prisoners, like in my case.
А адвокаты, которые защищают политзаключенных настойчиво, сами считаются экстремистами, лишаются лицензии и могут тоже попасть в тюрьму.
And the lawyers that defend political prisoners can be deprived of their license, and as we said before, can actually become themselves political prisoners. I can answer, I think, quickly as well on the UN sides. We work with the High Commissioner Turk, but we do believe, no human rights, but we do believe UN can play a more active role and more crucial one as well, both on the level of the Human Rights Committee, but also at the Secretary General level. Meanwhile, they have this access and some of the tools as well. We applaud the work of the Special Rapporteur Nis Muzhnik, who is doing a great job on actually saying what's going on in Belarus and putting the right picture on this. We of course see that you. No.
Have access?
No. But we see that Lukashenko's regime is trying to abuse the UN system, the UN General Assembly and other venues by exactly as you, Chairman, said, putting the facts that are totally not corresponding with reality. Also, quickly on the war in Ukraine is a blessing for Lukashenko. First, he is earning a lot of money in this war because he has turned more than 300 Belarusian enterprises into the military production. And 80% of the Belarusian military production goes to Russia, and actually far beyond that. It also goes to Iran, it also goes to North Korea, China, Cuba, Venezuela, you name it. This, as Reagan would call it, axis of evil works in place, and Lukashenko is a part of it. Second, meanwhile, there is a full-scale war in Ukraine. Lukashenko is not the bad guy, so he is in the shadow basically of Putin, and he's afraid that when there will be a ceasefire or a peace, that the focus will be again on Belarus, and we need to. A position of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya here, I want to state we support fully the Ukraine in this fight, and there is no doubt whatsoever. And last week, Madam President first held a bilateral meeting with President Zelensky in Vilnius. And we've been told that Ukraine, following actual US and other countries' example, will appoint a special envoy on Belarus, and we hope that our cooperation with Ukraine will continue. And one of the topics we discussed also with President Zelensky was accountability for Lukashenko and accountability for the crimes that he has done to Belarusians, but also to abduction, as Vitas mentioned before, to Ukrainian children. So this is also one of the track we need to support and work on. On women, we know the cases of a difficult situations of people, and what Marina Zolotova and others were sharing with us, that many of the women, they're deprived of the regular hygiene tools and items. We had a cases when a woman, a pregnant woman, was in prison and she couldn't give a birth, and the child died, and so on. So this is what Marina has shared with us. Some of these cases, they are actually really heartbroken, and there are more than 150 women behind bars. Some of them of more than 17 years old, as the case that I mentioned, and we need to do everything possible to save their lives.
The ICC has been a disappointment in the extreme and really going after Putin, but they did focus on the abducted children, at least some of them. And I'm wondering, is there any thought that the ICC could take on the case vis-a-vis Lukashenko and his abuse of children?
Well, Lithuania, in fact, has prepared a submission on Lukashenko regarding all the repressions, human rights violations, and in fact, it's an opportunity for any other country to actually simply join it. So it's clearly addressing the impunity issue. In addition to that, Lithuania is regularly organizing events in Geneva on political prisoners, one of the few countries which is very consistent in this regard. I'm happy to participate there, basically every time inviting former political prisoners so that they hear in Geneva the first-hand testimonies. At the same time, if we talk about the UN, it's not only Niels Muznieks, who is the special rapporteur on human rights, but there's also a special task force which was launched in March 2021, if I'm not mistaken, by the Human Rights Council and High Commissioner. So led by Karina Moskalenko. I have witnessed her report at the Human Rights Council last year. It was very detailed, very thorough. Again, unfortunately, we know that Belarus regime is not following these recommendations. So in a way, UN is serving as a platform, but we need to say that it's also up to all the member states that we are very consistent and that we use every opportunity to challenge Belarusian regime to have a more systemic approach and basically abolishing this terror state that we have discussed, because it's not only the release of political prisoners, we need to change the system, and unless it's addressed, the repressions will continue, unfortunately.
We will contact Ambassador Waltz at the UN. He used to be a member of our Foreign Affairs Committee. He's an unbelievably capable person and smart as it gets. All of what you're saying, to try to make sure that he is, of course, like everyone else internationally, there's so much drinking from a fire hydrant kind of thing, and the same way with Marco Rubio. I don't know how he handles it all. But that said, we will get everything you've been saying, the entire transcript to him, because I think he could be very, very helpful, as well as the rest of the team in Geneva. So,
and very shortly on the your question regarding Belarus, the war as a cover. Belarusian authorities are trying to come back to this balancing game, saying that if you pressure us too much, we will be inevitably embraced by Russia. And we need to be very clear that Belarus for years has been a country of transit for all sorts of goods in and out. So they are doing this sanction circumvention. They are a useful partner for Russia in this regard. If by releasing political prisoners, we are lifting the sanctions on Belarus, we are actually doing a favor not only to the Belarusian regime, but also to Russia, because they are interested that all technologies would go then from Belarus. That has been the case before. We know that China is actually circumventing sanctions in this regard. They are trading with Belarus, but we know that all of that is going to Russia eventually, and against Ukraine in their full-fledged war. So let's not make any mistake here that there is no fundamental change, and In order to achieve that, we only need to continue pressure.
If I may add a little bit, that piece on UN is that it's important to know that Belarus withdrew from optional protocol of ICCPR, which means in 2022, which means that individuals are not able to file petitions to Human Rights Committee. And as you know, that Belarus unfortunately has this one single instrument mechanism that they can use since they're not part of the Council of Europe or EU. So this is a very unfortunate situation, especially given the fact that Belarusian lawyers are well known as the top qualified lawyers on UN mechanisms. In fact, the numbers always indicate that there is the Belarusian lawyers are number one in terms of filing petitions to UN Human Rights Committee. I believe it was 60 petitions in 1 year, and which is usually not, yeah. So this is one point. And second point I was gonna mention about, I'm sorry, slipped my mind.
Okay, we can go back.
Maybe I could just also mention about the Belarus Democracy Act that
Yes.
for us, Chairman, it will be of crucial importance if the act will be passed. And here we also, I see in the room as well a representative of Belarusian diaspora here. And for the record, I just want to, admit that they also do a great work of putting Belarus on the agenda here. And we hope that, the diaspora and the people who are staying here, many of them, they also, were fleeing repressions, and we hope that they will be able to continue to stay in the United States, because many of them, if they come back to Belarus, they will be put to prison. So we hope that they will continue to have, their stay here in the United States, and also we really looking forward for the Belarusian Democracy Act, because this is as you said, a historical thing that you, Chairman, did together with at first President Bush and then with the Trump administration. This is very important for us, and we really would be looking forward.
Thank you. And we will push, it will get done. Lebetko's son, any sense how he's doing?
So he's doing bad, very bad. Last week he was put in this cell, like basically punishment confinement. And in Belarus we have now -30 Celsius degree. And in these cells there is no heating. So essentially it's one of the new or old forms of torture. So he's doing really bad, and Anatoly was passing this concerns as well to you, Chairman, and for him. And he's not alone. He's one of the cases of people, many people like that, who are put in. It's a system, yes, that are put now in this terrible confinements under the -30 Celsius, 25 to 30 Celsius degrees. So they're doing bad. I'm afraid to say.
This week we'll write to Lukashenko, and I will ask him if I can lead a delegation to visit his prisons. Now that doesn't, how is he going to say yes? During the worst days of the Soviet Union, Frank Wolf and I met with the Procurator General of the Soviet Union and said, we want to go where Anatoly Sharansky is, Natan Sharansky. He said, no problem, nothing to hide. It took 2 years. But we got to Perm Camp 35 and videotaped every single prisoner that we could meet with. It was about 25 prisoners, and worked for their release. I'm asking from this dais that Lukashenko allow us to come, and I'll put together a team of members to go to the prisons. And I hope he'll allow it. It'll be telling if he doesn't, but I think he just may do it. I was barred from going to Belarus because of the Belarus Democracy Act. But then when there was a OSCE Parliamentary Assembly in Lithuania, in Vilnius, the whole delegation of Americans went down to Minsk, and I got on the bus and I got there and was able to raise the issues while we were there with him directly. He did call me public enemy #1 because of the act. And as he did it, they served tea. I didn't touch it. But I just want to...
Page of honor.
But I really would, maybe you can help us somehow, but I do want to get into the prisons, because I do think that will be an eye-opener, and then that will help mobilize even more and bring light and scrutiny to what's going on there. So we'll do that letter right away, and any help you can give, it would be appreciated. Anything you'd like to add? Do you have that again? Ms. Cameron, I'd just like to add something.
Sure.
we keep losing it on this, but on the submission that was made by Belarus to the Human Rights Council, you read it, here's what they say, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Article 7 of the Constitution establishes the principle of the rule of law in the country. Belarus recognizes the primacy of generally recognized principle of international law and ensures that its legislation is in conformity with them. Belarus consistently fulfills its international human rights obligations at the national level, and then it goes on from there. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's very clear what it means in practice and
Right.
otherwise. But it's not a surprise,
Right.
So it's evident that unfortunately the situation on the ground is totally different, and it's sad to see how much people are suffering. But I know for a fact that legal community, human rights defenders are very grateful for U.S. Institutions, government, that the focus is being put on these matters, and there is ability to amplify the message. This is very important, especially for lawyers. One point that I wanted to mention is that when you were talking about diaspora and lawyers being in exile, is that it's really important to provide support to them to be able to work as lawyers. For example, Lithuania adopted a law allowing lawyers from third countries to be able to practice. So that's something like that could be very helpful for the lawyers. Another piece on ICC I wanted to add is that, yes, Lithuania was very Lithuania's referral to ICC on Belarusian violations was very helpful. Prosecutors also were looking at other submissions, and I know that many civil society members were interested to submit their support. What's lacking here is other government support of the referral of Lithuania, because usually it's always Lithuania, but Lithuania needs support in that regard. And
How about the United States? Have we supported them?
no,
I think so.
yeah.
That's a good
so
follow-up
that's-
for us.
Mhm.
Anything before we conclude? You've been an extraordinary panel. Thank you.
I think that we need to see all of this like a marathon. The regime thinks they are used to this marathon, and they think that we are going to be exhausted, that in democratic countries the governments change, prisoners are going to be forgotten. But I think that we need to look into the recently released political prisoners who are coming out like Sergei testifying here and continuing their fight. If they are not exhausted,
That's right.
we cannot do that either.
Sergey.
Я бы хотел, наверное, обратить внимание, как мы можем помочь в деле освобождения политзаключенных.
I want to just talk a little bit how we can be helpful in the release of political prisoners.
Очень важно, когда совершаются подобные сделки, очень важно на будущее пересчитать всех политзаключенных по головам.
When such deals are made, I think it's very important to count every and each person behind bars.
Потому что пока мы разговариваем, каждый день появляются новые политзаключенные.
While we talk, and there are new political prisoners that appear.
Лукашенко нельзя верить ни в малом, ни в большом.
We cannot trust and believe Lukashenko, not in small, not in big things.
Он всегда обманывал и будет это делать дальше.
He has been always lying, and he will continue to lie.
Американцам нужно понимать, что карты на вашей стороне, и у вас есть рычаг.
Americans should understand that you have a leverage and you have strong cards.
Не у Лукашенко.
Not Lukashenko doesn't have ones.
Вы очень нужны Лукашенко.
Lukashenko badly needs you.
И он хочет продать свои возможности президенту Трампу.
And he wants, for example, to sell his opportunities to President Trump.
Вы можете их покупать, а можете не покупать.
You can buy them or you cannot buy them, up to you.
У нас есть несколько рекомендаций для специального посланника господина Джона Коула, чтобы у него было больше карт, хотя карт у него и так достаточно.
We have some recommendations for John Cole in order to have more cards and more leverage, but he already has enough of them, a lot of them.
И пусть у американской администрации будет еще один дополнительный рычаг.
And we hope that American administration will have another form of leverage.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just conclude. Years ago, I wrote a law called the Torture Victims Relief Act, and we renewed it as current law today through the appropriations process. But what I learned as to what prisoners go through, and so often you're so tough, you don't relay just what the PTSD is that is suffered as a result of it. But the damage that is done, no matter who the person is overwhelmingly. And that's what drives me and many others, the physical and the psychological damage done to prisoners of conscience. And you know, in terms of will we ever ease up? Absolutely not. We need to put the pedal to the floor, so to speak, and accelerate as never before, because there is, you know, God willing, a new day for Belarus, and you're the reason why. And I can't say how awe-inspiring you are, and Sergei, you and your colleagues, but it's just amazing. Can't thank you enough.
Thank you for your support. Diplomacy saves lives. Thank you.
Hearing's adjourned. Thank you.